The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in May of 1878, and Isaac Whitmore knew before he even opened it that his quiet life in the mountains above Bisbee, Arizona, was about to get considerably less quiet. He stood outside his cabin, the worn paper trembling slightly in fingers more accustomed to axe handles and rifle stocks than delicate correspondence. The messenger boy had ridden hard from town, his horse still blowing steam in the cool mountain air. Isaac had tipped him well and sent him on his way, then stared at the folded message for a full 5 minutes before breaking the seal. The words were brief, scrawled in his sister's hurried hand. "Sending Margaret Duncan to you. Family emergency. Keep her safe until I send word. She needs structure. God help you, brother." Isaac folded the telegram and tucked it into his shirt pocket, his jaw tightening beneath the thick beard that covered most of his face. He was a large man, standing well over 6 feet with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway and arms corded with muscle from years of splitting wood, hauling water, and wrestling with the unforgiving terrain of the Arizona mountains. His dark hair hung past his collar, often tied back with a leather cord to keep it from his eyes during work. He had come to these mountains 3 years ago seeking solitude after the war, after watching too many men die for causes that seemed less clear with each passing year. He had built this cabin with his own hands, carved out a life that required nothing from anyone, asked nothing of the world below. And now his sister was sending him a woman. Not just any woman, but one who apparently needed structure, which in his experience meant trouble. 3 days later, Isaac was loading supplies onto his pack mule when he heard the approach of horses on the narrow trail that led to his cabin. He straightened, one hand instinctively moving to the rifle propped against the cabin wall, though he relaxed when he recognized the lead rider as Tom Henderson, a rancher from the valley who occasionally hired Isaac to track wolves or break particularly stubborn horses. Behind Tom rode a woman, and Isaac felt something shift in his chest at the sight of her. She sat astride her horse like she had been born in the saddle, her dark riding dress dusty from travel, but still somehow elegant. Auburn hair escaped from beneath her hat in wild curls that caught the afternoon sun like copper wire. Her face was flushed from the ride, eyes bright and alert as they took in everything around her with an intensity that made Isaac think of a hawk searching for prey. She was young, probably no more than 22 or 23, with a determined set to her jaw that suggested she was used to getting her way. "Whitmore," Tom called out as they drew near. "Got a delivery for you. Miss Margaret Duncan, straight from Denver." Margaret Duncan dismounted before anyone could help her, hitting the ground with practiced ease and immediately stretching her back with an audible groan. Lord, that was a ride. "Mr. Henderson, you promised me the last 10 miles would be easy." "I said easier than the first 40, Miss Duncan. Didn't say easy." Tom shot Isaac an apologetic look. "Your sister sent word ahead, said you were expecting her." Isaac stepped forward, very aware of how he must look to this refined city woman. His shirt was open at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms thick as fence posts. His beard was probably too long, his hair certainly too wild. He smelled of wood smoke and pine sap and honest sweat. "Isaac Whitmore, madam. Welcome to my mountain." Margaret turned those bright eyes on him, and Isaac felt the full force of her attention like a physical thing. She looked him up and down without the slightest hint of shame, her assessment thorough and completely unladylike. Then she smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "Margaret Duncan, but everyone calls me Maggie. Your sister Clara didn't mention you were quite so—" She paused, searching for a word. "Mountainous." Tom Henderson coughed to cover a laugh. Isaac felt heat rise up his neck, an unfamiliar sensation that irritated him. "Clara tends to focus on other qualities. Thank you for bringing her up, Tom. I appreciate it." "No trouble. Your sister paid well." Tom tipped his hat to Maggie. "Miss Duncan, you take care now. Whitmore here is a good man, even if he does prefer bears to people most days." "I can see why," Maggie said, still looking at Isaac with that unsettling directness. "People are exhausting. Bears probably make better conversation, too." Tom laughed and turned his horse back down the trail, leaving Isaac alone with this whirlwind of a woman and her pile of luggage. He counted 4 bags, which seemed excessive for someone who was supposedly staying temporarily. "That all your gear?" he asked, gesturing to the bags. "This is traveling light, Mr. Whitmore. You should see me when I am not rushing to flee a scandal." She said it so matter-of-factly that Isaac almost missed the word scandal. Almost. What kind of scandal? The kind that involves a senator's son, a horse race I was not supposed to enter, and a rather spectacular disagreement about whether women should be allowed to own property in their own names. Maggie picked up one of her bags with easy strength. I won the race, if you are curious. That is what made everyone truly angry. Isaac found himself fighting a smile. I see why Clara said you needed structure. Clara said I needed to disappear until people forgot about it. Structure is her polite way of saying she hopes you will bore me into submission. Maggie looked around at the towering pines, the steep mountain slopes, the cabin that stood solid and square against the wilderness. Though I have to say, this is considerably less boring than I expected. Give it a week. You will change your mind. Isaac picked up the other 3 bags as if they weighed nothing, which, judging by Maggie's expression, impressed her despite herself. Come on. I will show you where you will be sleeping. The cabin was simple but well built, everything crafted with the kind of care that spoke of a man who took pride in his work. The main room held a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair positioned to catch the afternoon light. Shelves lined one wall, filled with books that surprised Maggie. She had not expected a mountain hermit to own so many volumes. That is my room, Isaac said, pointing to a door on the left. You will take the room on the right. It is not much, but it is clean and dry. Maggie peered into the small bedroom, a bed with a thick quilt, a dresser, a chair by the window. Spartan but comfortable. It is perfect, much better than the hotel in Bisbee, which smelled like old cigars and desperation. Isaac set her bags down. I will get your trunk from the porch. There are rules if you're staying here. Oh, here we go. Maggie turned to face him, crossing her arms. Let me guess. Do not touch your things. Stay out of your way. Be quiet and obedient like a good little woman. I was going to say, do not wander off alone until you learn the terrain. Do your share of the work. And if you see a bear, do not try to race it. Isaac met her challenging gaze without flinching. I do not care if you are quiet. This is a big mountain, plenty of room for noise. That stopped her. Maggie tilted her head, reassessing him. You do not care if I am quiet? Your sister said you could not sit still. Said you drove your whole family crazy with your energy. Isaac shrugged his massive shoulders. Seems to me that is their problem, not yours. Up here there's plenty to keep busy with. You want to run around, just do it smart. For the first time since arriving, Maggie seemed at a loss for words. She opened her mouth, closed it, then laughed. It was a real laugh, full of genuine delight. Clara said you were different. She did not say how much. Clara worries too much. Isaac moved back toward the main room. Get settled. Supper is at sundown. Hope you like venison, because that is what we have got. Mr. Whitmore, I once ate rattlesnake on a dare. I think I can handle venison. Just Isaac. And somehow, I believe you about the rattlesnake. Over the next few days, Isaac learned that his sister had not been exaggerating about Margaret Duncan's inability to sit still. The woman was in constant motion from the moment she woke until she finally collapsed into bed at night. She explored every inch of the clearing around the cabin, climbed trees to get better views of the valley below, and asked approximately 10,000 questions about everything from the types of pine cones to how Isaac knew where to find water. Do not you ever just sit and relax? Isaac asked on the 3rd morning, watching as she paced the length of the porch for the dozenth time. Why would I sit when there is so much to see and do? Maggie gestured expansively at the mountains around them. There are plants I have never seen before, birds with calls I do not recognize, and Tom Henderson mentioned there is a whole canyon system on the north side of your property. How can I sit still when there's all of that out there? Isaac was repairing a leather harness, his large fingers surprisingly nimble with the needle and thread. Most people who come up here want peace and quiet. I am not most people. Maggie stopped pacing and looked at him directly. Clara sent me to you because she thought you would try to calm me down, make me more acceptable to society. But you do not seem interested in doing that. I am not. Isaac set down the harness. You want to know what I think? Always. I think the world has enough quiet, boring people. I think if you have got fire in you, you should let it burn. He stood, his full height casting a shadow across the porch. But fire needs direction, or it just destroys everything. So maybe while you are here, You learn how to aim all that energy instead of letting it scatter. Maggie stared at him, something shifting in her expression. You're not at all what I expected. Neither are you. Isaac picked up his axe from where it leaned against the wall. Come on. If you cannot sit still, you might as well make yourself useful. I need to split wood for winter, and you can learn how to do it properly. For the next 2 hours, Isaac taught Maggie the art of splitting wood. He showed her how to read the grain, where to place the wedge, how to let the axe's weight do most of the work. She threw herself into it with characteristic intensity, her first attempts clumsy but determined. By the 20th log, she was getting the hang of it, and by the 40th, she had blisters forming on her palms despite the gloves Isaac had given her. That is enough for today, Isaac said, catching her wrist gently when she reached for another log. His hand was enormous around her slender wrist, warm and calloused. You keep going. You will not be able to hold a fork at dinner. I can keep going, Maggie protested, but Isaac could see the exhaustion in her face, the slight tremor in her arms. I know you can, but there's a difference between can and should. He released her wrist, very aware of how small and delicate she had felt in his grip. Come on. There's a stream about half a mile up where the water stays cold year-round. Good for sore muscles. The walk to the stream took them through a stand of aspens that whispered and shook in the afternoon breeze. Maggie peppered Isaac with questions about the trees, the rock formations, the best routes through the mountains. He answered patiently, surprised by how much he enjoyed her curiosity. Most people who came to the mountains were too busy complaining about the hardship to actually see the beauty around them. The stream was exactly as Isaac had described, crystal clear and cold enough to make Maggie gasp when she dipped her hands in. She knelt by the water, cupping it to drink, then splashing her face and neck with obvious relief. This is incredible, she said, looking around at the small meadow the stream ran through. Wildflowers dotted the grass in explosions of yellow and purple. How did you find this place? Spent a lot of time wandering when I first came up here. Isaac sat on a flat rock near the water's edge. Needed to learn the land, and I did not much feel like talking to people after the war. Clara said you were at Gettysburg. Among other places. Isaac's voice went flat, and Maggie was perceptive enough to hear the door closing on the topic. I will not pry, she said softly. But if you ever want to talk about it, I am a good listener, when I choose to be. I will keep that in mind. Isaac watched her explore the meadow, bending to examine flowers, chasing a butterfly that had landed on a nearby bush. Even exhausted from splitting wood, she could not stop moving, could not stop engaging with the world around her. Most people would find it exhausting. Isaac found it mesmerizing. 2 weeks passed, and Isaac found his quiet life becoming decidedly less quiet. Maggie was everywhere at once, throwing herself into every aspect of mountain living with ferocious enthusiasm. She learned to shoot, and though her aim was terrible at first, she practiced until she could hit a target more often than not. She learned to track deer, to identify edible plants, to predict weather by watching the sky. She asked questions constantly, challenged his assumptions, argued with him about everything from politics to the best way to make coffee. It should have driven him crazy. Instead, Isaac found himself looking forward to each day, wondering what Maggie would discover next, what new enthusiasm would capture her attention. The cabin that had felt comfortably solitary now felt empty when she was not in it. The mountains that had been his refuge now seemed incomplete without her laughter echoing off the rocks. He was in trouble, and he knew it. The realization hit him fully one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley below in shades of orange and gold. Maggie had been unusually quiet for the last 10 minutes, which was so rare that Isaac had been sneaking glances at her to make sure she was all right. What are you thinking about? He finally asked. Wondering when Clara will send word that it is safe for me to return to Denver. Maggie pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. The scandal should have died down by now. I will probably need to leave soon. Something cold settled in Isaac's chest. You do not sound happy about that. I'm not. Maggie looked at him, and in the fading light, her eyes were impossibly green. I've never felt as free as I do here. In Denver, I was always too much, too loud, too energetic, too improper. But here, you just let me be myself. More than that, you encourage it. Because yourself is someone worth knowing, Isaac said, the words coming easier than he expected. You are brave and curious and completely unstoppable when you set your mind to something. Why would I want to change that? Isaac. Maggie's voice was soft, uncertain in a way he had never heard from her before. He stood abruptly, unable to sit still for once himself. I should check the horses, make sure they have water for the night. Isaac, wait. Maggie was on her feet too, moving to block his path. Why do you always run away when conversations get personal? I'm not running. I'm doing my work. You are absolutely running. She put a hand on his chest, and even through his shirt he could feel the warmth of her palm. I have been here 2 weeks, and I have told you about my family, my dreams, my fears. But you barely tell me anything about yourself. It is like you are afraid if you let me in, something terrible will happen. Isaac looked down at her, at this small, fierce woman who had somehow slipped past all his carefully constructed walls. Something terrible will happen. What? I will not want you to leave. The admission felt like jumping off a cliff, and you will leave anyway, because you have a whole life waiting for you in Denver, and I'm just a mountain hermit who talks to bears. Maggie's expression softened. What if I do not want to leave? You say that now, but you do not know what you are saying. You have been here 2 weeks. That is not enough time to give up your whole life. Isaac, I have known from the first day that this is where I was meant to be. Her hand was still on his chest, and she could probably feel how hard his heart was beating. Do you really think I split wood for hours and learned to shoot and climbed every mountain in sight just because I was bored? I was trying to prove to you that I could survive here, that I was strong enough to build a life in these mountains. Maggie, you do not have to prove anything to me. Then believe me when I say I do not want to go back to Denver. I do not want to be squeezed back into a box that never fit me in the first place. I want to stay here with you. Isaac reached up and covered her hand with his own, dwarfing it. I am not good at this. I have been alone for 3 years by choice. I do not know how to be around people anymore, let alone someone like you. Someone like me. Someone who makes me want things I thought I had given up on. Someone who makes this cabin feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. He turned her hand over, looking at the blisters that had formed and healed from all her hard work. Someone who probably deserves better than a broken-down soldier hiding from the world. Isaac Whitmore, you listen to me. Maggie's voice took on that commanding tone she used when she was particularly determined about something. You are not broken. You are healing, which is different. And you are not hiding. You are protecting yourself, which you have every right to do after what you have been through. But maybe it is time to let someone in. Maybe it is time to let yourself want things again. He wanted to argue, to push her away for her own good, to maintain the distance that had kept him safe for so long. But looking at her face, seeing the absolute certainty in her eyes, he found he could not do it. Instead, he did something he had not done in years. He let himself be vulnerable. I want you to stay, he said, his voice rough. I have wanted that since the first week you were here. You turned my whole life upside down, and instead of hating it, I found I could not imagine going back to how things were before. Maggie's smile was radiant. Then ask me properly. Isaac took a breath, then another. His hands moved to her waist, and she felt impossibly small against his palms. Margaret Duncan, will you stay here with me? Not as my sister's refugee, not as a temporary guest, but as someone building a life here? With me? Yes. She said it without hesitation, reaching up to cup his bearded face in both hands. Yes, I will stay. I will split wood and track deer and probably drive you a little bit crazy with all my questions and energy. And I will be happier than I have ever been in my entire life. Isaac bent his head and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper. When she pressed closer against him, she tasted like the cold stream water and the wild strawberries they had picked that afternoon. Her hands slid into his hair, and he wrapped his arms around her completely, lifting her off her feet without meaning to. She laughed against his mouth, and he set her down carefully, reluctantly. I should write to Clara, Maggie said breathlessly. Tell her I will not be coming back to Denver. She is going to think I kidnapped you and forced you to stay. Then she does not know me very well. Maggie threaded her fingers through his. Come on, let's write the letter together. I want to see her face when she reads that her impossible brother and her impossible friend are planning to build a life together. That night, they sat at the kitchen table composing a letter that went through several drafts before they settled on something that conveyed the news without sending Clara into complete hysterics. Isaac watched Maggie's face as she wrote, the way her tongue peeked out when she concentrated, the way her eyes sparkled with mischief when she read certain passages aloud. "Listen to this part," she said. "I know you sent me here hoping Isaac would teach me to be more conventional, but instead, he has taught me that there is nothing wrong with being exactly who I am. He has also taught me to split wood, track deer, and shoot reasonably straight, which are far more useful skills than embroidery and pleasant conversation." Isaac snorted. "Clara is definitely going to think I corrupted you." "Good. Let her think that." Maggie reached across the table and took his hand. "Isaac, are you sure about this? Really sure? Because once Clara gets this letter, there is no taking it back. Everyone will know." "I am sure," and he was, with a certainty that surprised him. "But there is something we need to discuss." "What?" "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them. "I will not have you staying here unmarried. People already talk enough. I will not give them more reason to tear you down." Maggie's eyes widened. "Isaac Whitmore, are you proposing to me?" "I suppose I am, though I am doing a terrible job of it." He stood and came around the table, then did something that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. He knelt beside her chair, taking both her hands in his. "Maggie, I do not have a ring to offer you, and I am not good with pretty words, but I can promise you a life where you never have to be anything other than exactly who you are. I can promise you these mountains, this freedom, and every bit of myself that is worth giving. Will you marry me?" Tears sparkled in Maggie's eyes, but her smile was pure joy. "Yes. Absolutely yes. Though I have to tell you, Isaac, I am going to be a terrible wife by conventional standards. I'm going to wear pants when it is practical. I'm going to keep climbing mountains, and I'm probably going to argue with you about everything. I would not want you any other way." He pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, settling into his lap as if she had always belonged there. They were married 3 weeks later in Bisbee, with Clara and her husband making the long journey from Denver to witness what Clara loudly proclaimed was either the best or worst idea anyone in the family had ever had. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church at the edge of town, with Tom Henderson and his wife serving as witnesses along with Clara. Isaac stood at the altar in his best clothes, which were still rough by city standards, but clean and carefully mended. His hair was pulled back, his beard neatly trimmed, and he felt absurdly nervous waiting for Maggie to appear. Then the doors opened and she walked in, and all his nervousness evaporated. She wore a simple dress of deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, her auburn hair partially tamed but still wild around her face. She did not walk sedately down the aisle like a proper bride. She practically ran, her face alight with happiness, until she reached him and grabbed both his hands. "Hello," she whispered, grinning up at him. "Hello yourself," he whispered back, and then the ceremony began. When the preacher asked if there was any reason these two should not be wed, Clara muttered something about madness and mountain air, but her husband elbowed her quiet. When Isaac slipped a simple gold band onto Maggie's finger and promised to love her for the rest of his days, his voice was steady and sure. And when Maggie promised to honor him with all her wild heart and restless spirit, there was not a dry eye in the small church. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said, and Isaac did not hesitate. The kiss was deep and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, Maggie's laugh was pure music. "We did it," she said, wonder in her voice. "We did." Isaac touched his forehead to hers. "No going back now." "Would not dream of it." The reception was held at Tom Henderson's ranch, a rowdy affair with music and dancing and enough food to feed half of Bisbee. Isaac endured the socializing with good grace, knowing it meant something to Maggie to celebrate properly. But he found himself watching the door, calculating how soon they could politely leave and return to the mountain. Clara cornered him near the punch bowl, her expression a mix of concern and grudging approval. "Take care of her, Isaac. She's more fragile than she lets on." "I know." Isaac met his sister's eyes. "And she is stronger than you give her credit for. She's going to be fine, Clara. We both are." "I hope you're right." Clara squeezed his arm. "But I have to admit, I've never seen her this happy. Or you, for that matter. You look almost human again." "That is Maggie's doing." "I know," Clara smiled. "Maybe you both needed each other more than I realized when I sent her to you." As the sun began to set, Isaac found Maggie on the edge of the party, staring out at the mountains that rose in the distance. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Whitmore?" She leaned back against him, solid and warm. "I have been ready for hours. I love your sister. But if one more person tells me how lucky I am to have caught such a fine man, I am going to scream. You did not catch me. I caught you. We caught each other." She turned in his arms, looping her hands behind his neck. "Now take me home, husband. I want to wake up tomorrow in our cabin, in our mountains, and start our life together properly." The ride back up the mountain was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The moon was nearly full, lighting their way through the pines, and the night air was cool and clean. When they finally reached the cabin, Isaac lifted Maggie from her horse in one smooth motion, cradling her against his chest. "I can walk, you know," she protested, but she was smiling. "I know. Let me do this anyway." He carried her through the door and into their home, setting her down gently in the main room. The fire he had banked before they left was still glowing, and he quickly built it back up while Maggie lit the lamps. When he turned back, she was watching him with an expression that made his breath catch. There was love there, yes, but also desire and trust and a vulnerability she rarely showed the world. She held out her hand to him, and he crossed the room to take it, letting her lead him to his bedroom. Their bedroom now. What followed was tender and passionate and completely private, a joining of two people who had found in each other everything they had been missing. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Maggie's head on Isaac's chest, his hand stroking slowly through her hair. "I love you," she said into the darkness. "I should have said it before, but I was afraid you would think it was too soon." "It probably is too soon by most standards." Isaac pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "But I love you too. Have since you showed up and started reorganizing my entire life without asking permission." "I never ask permission for anything. I have noticed." He pulled her closer. "Thank God for that." They fell into a rhythm over the following months, learning each other's habits and quirks, building a partnership that worked precisely because they were so different. Isaac provided the steady foundation, the quiet strength that kept everything stable. Maggie provided the energy and enthusiasm that kept life from becoming stagnant. Together, they were balanced in a way neither had been alone. Maggie threw herself into mountain life with the same intensity she brought to everything. She learned to preserve food for the winter, to smoke meat and can vegetables. She learned which herbs could be used for medicine and which were dangerous. She learned to read the weather and the land, to find water in unlikely places, to navigate by the stars. But she also insisted on changes that made the cabin more of a home. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted a garden that she tended with fierce determination, and convinced Isaac to build a larger porch where they could sit and watch the sunsets together. She filled the cabin with wildflowers in the summer, with her laughter year-round. She also drove Isaac absolutely crazy on a regular basis, usually by doing things that were either dangerous or unconventional, or both. He nearly had a heart attack the day he came back from checking traps to find her on the roof, repairing loose shingles. "Maggie, what in the name of God are you doing up there?" "Fixing the roof. You said last week that it needed work." "I meant I would fix it, not that you would climb up there and give me a heart attack. Isaac, I am perfectly safe. I tied myself off and everything," she demonstrated by tugging on the rope around her waist. "See? I listen when you teach me things." "That is not the point. What if you fell while I was gone? Then I would have caught myself with the rope." She peered down at him, shading her eyes against the sun. "Are you really worried, or are you just upset because I did something without asking?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Both. I know you are capable, but I still worry." "That is fair. I would worry if you did something dangerous, too." She finished hammering the last shingle into place, then carefully made her way to the edge of the roof. "Help me down." Isaac positioned himself below her, and she basically jumped into his arms, trusting completely that he would catch her. He did, of course, but his heart was pounding as he set her on her feet. You are going to be the death of me, woman. But what a way to go. She stood on her toes and kissed him. Besides, you said you wanted me to keep your quiet life interesting. I am just fulfilling my wifely duties. I said no such thing. You absolutely did. The first week I was here, you said you did not mind that I could not sit still, that it would keep things interesting. I'm just making sure I live up to expectations. Isaac pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. You exceed every expectation I ever had, even the ones I did not know I had. That winter was hard, as winters in the Arizona mountains tended to be. Snow piled high around the cabin, and there were days when it was too dangerous to venture outside at all. But Isaac found he did not mind being trapped indoors the way he had previous winters. Maggie filled the small space with warmth and life, finding 1,000 ways to keep them both occupied. She taught him to play chess, which he was terrible at. He taught her to whittle, which she took to with predictable enthusiasm, soon producing an entire menagerie of wooden animals. They read to each other by the fire, books from Isaac's extensive collection that Maggie had been slowly working her way through. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their future. And when the cabin fever got too intense, when Maggie started pacing like a caged animal, Isaac bundled her up in furs and took her outside to teach her how to navigate in deep snow, how to spot animal tracks, how to find her way home if she ever got lost. He knew she needed to move, needed to engage with the world, and he loved that about her too much to try to contain it. One particularly bitter night in January, they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside, wrapped around each other for warmth. Maggie was tracing idle patterns on Isaac's chest, her fingers following the scars he had acquired over the years. "Tell me about the war," she said softly. "Not if you do not want to, but I want to know the things that shaped you into who you are." Isaac was quiet for so long that Maggie thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and steady in the darkness. He told her about Gettysburg, about the friends he had lost, about the things he had done that still haunted him. He told her about the noise and the chaos and the terrible certainty that he would not survive to see another day. He told her about the silence after, worse than any battle, when he realized he was alive, and so many others were not. "I came to the mountain to get away from people," he said. "But really, I was running from myself, from the guilt of surviving when better men did not." Maggie pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "You survived because you were meant to survive. You were meant to be here, in these mountains. You were meant to build this cabin and live this life and eventually meet me. You do not know that. I do, because if any single thing had been different, we would not have found each other, and I refuse to believe that what we have is an accident." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the dim light from the banked fire. "You are a good man, Isaac Whitmore. The war did not change that. It just hurt you. But you are healing, and I am going to be here with you every step of the way." Isaac pulled her back down against him, holding her tight. "I do not deserve you. Probably not. But you are stuck with me anyway." Spring came eventually, as it always did, bringing with it the thaw and the return of the world to life. Maggie spent hours in her garden, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil with more determination than sense. Isaac expanded their cabin, building an addition that would serve as a workshop and storage space, teasing Maggie that they needed somewhere to put all the wooden animals she kept carving. In May, a full year after Maggie had first arrived on the mountain, Clara and her husband came to visit. Clara took one look at Maggie, sun-browned and strong, wearing practical trousers and one of Isaac's old shirts, her hair in a braid down her back, and burst into tears. "You look so happy," Clara said, hugging Maggie tightly. "I was so worried about you, but you look absolutely radiant." "I am happy," Maggie said simply. "Happier than I have ever been." Clara turned to Isaac, who was watching the reunion with a small smile. "Thank you for taking care of her, and for letting her be herself." "She does not need taking care of," Isaac said. "She is stronger than both of us combined, but you are welcome anyway." The visit went well, with Clara and her husband marveling at how much Maggie and Isaac had accomplished. The garden was thriving, the cabin was in excellent repair, and there was an obvious deep love between the newlyweds that made Clara admit, finally, that sending Maggie to the mountain had been exactly the right decision. On their last night, Clara pulled Maggie aside while the men were tending to the horses. "I have to ask, do you ever miss Denver? The parties, the society, the life you left behind?" Maggie looked around at the mountains rising all around them, at the cabin where she had found her place in the world, at Isaac walking back from the stable with the setting sun behind him. "Not even for a second. This is where I belong, Clara. With him, in this place. I have never been more sure of anything in my life." "Then I'm happy for you, truly." Clara hugged her again. "But please write more often, I worry." "I will, I promise." After Clara and her husband left, the mountain settled back into its usual routines. Summer brought longer days and harder work as they prepared for the next winter. Maggie helped Isaac with everything from mending fences to breaking a new horse Tom Henderson had brought up for them. She took a nasty fall during the breaking process, landing hard enough to knock the wind out of her, and Isaac had nearly called the whole thing off until Maggie hauled herself back up and demanded another try. "You could have been seriously hurt," Isaac said, his hands shaking slightly as he checked her over for injuries. "But I was not. I'm fine." She brushed dust from her clothes. "Now help me back up. I'm not letting this horse win." "Maggie, you do not have anything to prove." "This is not about proving anything. This is about finishing what I started." She caught his face in her hands, making him look at her. "I need you to trust that I know my own limits, Isaac. I need you to trust that I will ask for help if I need it. Can you do that?" It was hard, every instinct screaming at him to protect her, to keep her safe, but he forced himself to nod. "I can do that. But if you break anything, I reserve the right to say I told you so." "Fair enough." She kissed him quickly and then climbed back on the horse. She broke the horse by the end of the day, and Isaac had never been more proud or more terrified in his life. That night, as they lay in bed recovering from the day's exertions, Maggie suddenly sat up. "Isaac, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in her voice made him immediately alert. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. At least, I do not think so." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "I am pregnant." The world seemed to stop. Isaac stared at his hand on her stomach, trying to process the words. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure. I have missed 2 courses and I have been sick in the mornings for the last week. I was waiting to be certain before I told you." She watched his face anxiously. "Are you happy? I know we have not really talked about children, and we have only been married a year, and maybe it is too soon." Isaac pulled her into his arms, cutting off her nervous rambling. "I am terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. So yes, I am happy. Are you?" "Yes." He could hear the smile in her voice. "I'm going to be a terrible mother by conventional standards, you know. I'm going to teach our children to climb trees and track deer and ask too many questions." "Good. Those are important skills." He pulled back to look at her face. "But you are not breaking any more horses until after the baby is born." "That seems fair." She settled back against his chest. "We are going to have a baby." "Isaac, a tiny person who is half you and half me." "God help that child," Isaac said, but he was grinning. "God help all of us." Maggie's pregnancy was exactly as eventful as Isaac had feared. She refused to slow down, insisting she felt fine right up until she suddenly did not feel fine, which usually resulted in Isaac catching her when she swayed or forcing her to sit down when she got dizzy. She fought him on it at first, hating the idea of being weak or limited, until Isaac finally sat her down and explained that taking care of herself was not the same as giving up. "I am not trying to cage you," he said, taking her hands in his, "but I need you to be safe. Both of you. If that means you sit down when you are tired or let me carry the heavy loads for a while, that is not you being weak. That is you being smart." Maggie had cried then, hormones and frustration combining into tears that she wiped away angrily. "I hate this. I hate feeling limited." "I know, but it is temporary. And once the baby is born, you can go back to driving me crazy with all your adventures." He kissed her forehead. "Until then, let me take care of you. Please." She had agreed, reluctantly, and true to her word, she did slow down. Not by much, and she still found ways to be useful, but she let Isaac handle the more strenuous work without argument. She focused on preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, reading every book on childbirth and infant care she could get her hands on. Tom Henderson brought up a midwife from Bisbee in late December, a sturdy woman named Mrs. Patterson, who took one look at Maggie and proclaimed her healthy as a horse and twice as stubborn. "She will be fine," Mrs. Patterson told Isaac, "though I will stay until after the baby comes, just to make sure everything goes smoothly." Isaac was grateful for her presence, especially when Maggie went into labor on a cold January morning. The labor was long and difficult, and Isaac felt completely helpless as he held Maggie's hand and listened to her scream. Mrs. Patterson seemed unconcerned, declaring everything normal, but Isaac wanted to tear the world apart to make the pain stop. "You are doing so well," he kept saying over and over. "You are the strongest person I have ever known. You can do this." "I'm going to murder you for doing this to me," Maggie panted between contractions, but she squeezed his hand like a lifeline. "That is fair. You can murder me later. Right now you need to keep going." And she did, because Maggie Duncan Whitmore never gave up on anything in her life. When their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the cabin, Isaac felt something break open in his chest. Mrs. Patterson cleaned the baby efficiently and placed him in Maggie's arms, and Isaac knelt beside the bed, staring in wonder at this tiny, perfect person they had created. "He has your eyes," Maggie said softly, exhausted but glowing. "Look at him, Isaac. We made this." "We did." Isaac touched one finger to the baby's tiny fist, which immediately wrapped around it. "He is perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months without settling on anything. But looking at his son, Isaac knew immediately. "James, after my father." "James Whitmore," Maggie smiled. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the mountain." Mrs. Patterson stayed for 2 more weeks, making sure both Maggie and the baby were healthy and teaching them the basics of infant care. Maggie was not a natural at the beginning, getting frustrated when James cried, and she could not figure out why, but she learned quickly. Isaac was surprisingly good with the baby, his large hands gentle as he changed diapers and walked the floor at night when James was fussy. "You are a natural father," Maggie said one night, watching him rock their son back to sleep. "I had no idea what I was doing until he got here," Isaac admitted. "But it turns out instinct covers a lot. We're going to be all right, are not we? The 3 of us?" Isaac looked at his wife and son, at the life they had built together in these mountains, and felt a peace he had not known since before the war. "We are going to be better than all right. We are going to be happy." And they were. James was a good baby, curious and alert, watching the world with the same intensity as his mother. As he grew, it became clear he had inherited Maggie's restlessness, along with Isaac's quiet strength. He learned to crawl at 5 months and was walking by 10, always moving, always exploring. "He is going to give us gray hair before he is 2, Isaac said, catching James for the 10th time as the toddler tried to climb the bookshelf. "He is our son. What did you expect?" Maggie swept James up and kissed his chubby cheek. "Besides, it is good practice for when we have more." "More?" Isaac looked at her, eyebrows raised. "You want more children after how difficult James was?" "He was not that difficult. And yes, I want more, at least 2 or 3 more." She grinned at his expression. "We have room on this mountain for a whole pack of wild children, Isaac. Think of the adventures they will have. Think of the heart attacks I will have watching them." But he was smiling, because the idea of filling their cabin with children, with noise and chaos and love, appealed to him more than he wanted to admit. He had spent so long alone, so long quiet, that the thought of a house full of life felt like a gift he had not known to ask for. 2 years later, Maggie gave birth to twin girls, and Isaac's capacity for worry expanded exponentially. The girls were identical, with Maggie's auburn hair and bright green eyes, and they were absolute terrors from the moment they could move. They climbed everything, questioned everything, and took turns keeping their parents awake at night. "We named them Emma and Rose," Isaac wrote to Clara. "They are beautiful and exhausting, and I have no idea how we're going to keep them alive to adulthood, but Maggie seems confident, so I'm trying to be as well." 3-year-old James took his role as big brother seriously, trying to help corral his sisters and looking utterly betrayed when they did not listen to him. Isaac watched his son struggle with the new additions to the family and took him aside one afternoon for a talk. "I know the twins are a lot," Isaac said, sitting on the porch with James in his lap. "And I know they take up a lot of your mother's attention right now, but that does not mean we love you any less." "They cry all the time," James said, his little face scrunched in annoyance. "And Mama is always tired." "That is true. Babies are hard work. But you know what? You were the same way when you were little. And your mother and I loved every minute of it, just like we love your sisters." Isaac ruffled his son's dark hair. "You're still our first, our best boy. Nothing will change that." James considered this. "Can I teach them to track deer when they are bigger?" "Absolutely. In fact, I am counting on you to teach them everything you know." "Okay," James nodded, satisfied. "But they still cry too much." "That I cannot argue with." As the children grew, the cabin grew with them. Isaac built additional rooms, expanded the porch, constructed a sturdy fence around Maggie's garden to keep small hands from pulling up the vegetables. The quiet mountain refuge became a bustling homestead, filled with laughter and shouting and the constant motion of active children. Maggie thrived in the chaos. She taught the children to read and write, to identify plants and animals, to respect the mountain and everything that lived on it. She told them stories about growing up in Denver, about the scandalous horse race that had led her to their father, about how sometimes the best thing you could do was refuse to be what other people expected. Isaac taught them practical skills, how to chop wood, how to shoot, how to survive if they ever got lost in the wilderness. He taught them patience and quiet observation, the value of watching and waiting. He taught them that strength was not just physical, that the strongest people were often the ones who were brave enough to be gentle. Together, they raised children who were wild and free and deeply loved, children who knew how to be still when necessary, but who were never punished for their energy or curiosity. When James was 8 and the twins were 5, Maggie announced she was pregnant again. Isaac, who had been in the middle of teaching James how to replace a horseshoe, dropped the hoof he was holding. "Again?" "Again," Maggie was grinning. "I know we said we were done after the twins, but apparently our children had other ideas. Maggie, you are going to kill me." "Probably. But what a legacy we will leave." She wrapped her arms around him as much as she could with her growing belly. 4 children, Isaac. We are going to have 4 children running around this mountain." "God help us all," he said, but he was smiling as he pulled her close. Their 4th child, a boy they named Thomas after Tom Henderson, who had become like family over the years, was born in early spring. He was calm and quiet from the start, so different from his siblings that Maggie joked he must have been switched at birth. But he had Isaac's steady nature and Maggie's bright eyes, and he fit into their family as perfectly as if he had always been there. The years passed in a blur of activity and love. James grew tall and strong, with his father's build and his mother's curiosity. The twins were inseparable and completely unstoppable, finding trouble in places Isaac had not known trouble could exist. Thomas watched it all with quiet amusement, content to observe until he decided to participate, at which point he inevitably surprised everyone with some feat of unexpected boldness. Clara visited regularly, bringing news from Denver and gifts for the children. She marveled at how happy Maggie was, how comfortable in her own skin, how completely at home in these mountains that had once seemed so foreign. "You were right," Clara said one evening, watching Maggie and Isaac dance on the porch while the children played nearby. This was exactly where she needed to be. "She was right," Isaac corrected. "I just stopped trying to change her and let her be herself." "That is more than most men would do." "Then most men are fools." Isaac watched Maggie spin one of the twins around, both of them laughing. "She is extraordinary. Why would I want to diminish that?" When James was 16, he asked his father about the war. They were working together to repair the stable roof, a job that required trust and teamwork, and Isaac found himself telling his son things he had never planned to share. "I killed people," he said bluntly. "Good people, probably, who were just following orders like I was. I saw friends die in front of me. I watched a man bleed out in my arms because there was no doctor close enough to save him. And when it was all over, I felt like I had left the best parts of myself on those battlefields." James was quiet, processing this. "But you came here. You built this." "I ran away here," Isaac corrected. "Your mother would probably say I came here to heal, and maybe she is right. But at the time, it felt like running. Did it work? Did you heal? Isaac looked at his son, so earnest and serious, and chose his words carefully. I learned to live with what I had done. I learned that surviving was not something to feel guilty about. And when your mother came into my life, I learned that I could still have good things, that I was not broken beyond repair. He put a hand on James's shoulder. You carry your scars, son, but you do not let them define you. That is the lesson I hope I have taught you. You have, James said quietly. You and Mama both. You have taught us that we can be whoever we want to be, as long as we are honest about it. Isaac felt pride swell in his chest. Then we did our job right. The twins, predictably, were harder to manage as they got older. Emma wanted to travel, to see the world beyond the mountain. Rose wanted to stay and learn everything there was to know about medicine and healing. They fought constantly, pulled between their different dreams, until Maggie sat them down and told them the story of her own youth. I wanted things I was not supposed to want, she said. I wanted to ride horses and own property and make my own decisions. And people told me I could not, that I should not, that I was wrong for even wanting those things. But I did them anyway, and that is how I found my way here to your father. But what if our dreams take us away from here? Emma asked. What if we want something different than what you and Papa have? Then you go find it, Maggie said simply. Your father and I did not build this life for you so you would feel trapped by it. We built it so you would know that you could build anything you wanted. If that means staying here, wonderful. If it means leaving and finding your own path, that is wonderful too. All we ask is that you be true to yourselves and that you come home to visit sometimes. Rose wiped away tears. But I do not want to leave. I love it here. Then stay, Isaac said, coming to sit with them. There is no wrong answer. Girls, your mother and I will love you and support you no matter what you choose. That is what parents do. In the end, Emma did leave, traveling east to become a teacher in a growing town in Colorado. She wrote long letters about her adventures, about the children she taught, about the man she eventually married. Rose stayed, apprenticing with the town doctor in Bisbee and eventually taking over his practice when he retired. James took over the mountain property, building his own cabin nearby with his father's help, while Thomas surprised everyone by developing a talent for woodworking that led to a successful furniture business. As their children grew and left and returned and grew some more, Isaac and Maggie found themselves settling into a new phase of life. The cabin was quieter now, though still visited regularly by children and eventually grandchildren. They had more time for each other, more time to simply sit and watch the sun set over the valley they had made their home. Do you ever regret it? Isaac asked one evening, as they sat on the porch in their rocking chairs. They were both older now, their hair gray, their faces lined with years of laughter and hard work. Giving up Denver, the life you could have had? Maggie reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. Not once, not even for a second. This was always where I was meant to be. Even when I was stubborn and impossible. Especially then. Stubborn and impossible is my specialty, remember? She squeezed his hand. Besides, you were never that hard to manage once I figured you out. You make me sound like one of the horses. Well, you do have similarities. Strong, reliable, occasionally prone to bolting when startled. Isaac laughed, the sound echoing off the mountains around them. I love you, Maggie Whitmore. I have loved you since the day you showed up here and refused to be anything other than exactly who you are. I love you too. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Thank you for seeing me when no one else would. Thank you for building this life with me. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, could see the smoke from James's cabin rising through the trees. The mountain that had once been Isaac's solitary refuge was now filled with life and love and the legacy they had built together. Do you think we did right by them? Isaac asked. The children. I think we gave them roots and wings, which is all any parent can do, Maggie said. They know where they come from. They know they are loved, and they know they are free to become whoever they want to be. What more could we give them? Nothing, you are right, Isaac pulled her closer. You usually are. Finally, he admits it. Years later, when Isaac was in his 70s and Maggie not far behind, they sat in the same rocking chairs on the same porch, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had come to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. The family had grown large and boisterous, filled with personalities as varied as the mountains around them, but all of them bore the mark of Isaac and Maggie's influence, confident, curious, unafraid to be themselves. James gave a toast. His own children gathered around him. To my parents, who taught us that love is not about changing someone to fit your expectations. It is about celebrating who they are and building a life that has room for both of you to grow. Papa, you took a woman everyone said was too wild, too restless, too much, and you said, good. That will make life interesting. And Mama, you took a man who had retreated from the world and showed him that living was worth the risk. Thank you for showing us what real love looks like. There were tears and laughter and more toasts, and through it all, Isaac and Maggie sat hand in hand, watching the family they had built, the legacy they had created. When the party finally wound down and the last grandchild had been tucked into bed somewhere in the various cabins that now dotted the mountain, they returned to the porch one more time. 50 years, Maggie marveled. It seems impossible. Best 50 years of my life, Isaac said, even when you drove me absolutely crazy. Especially when I drove you crazy. That is when things were most interesting. She looked at him, her green eyes still as bright as they had been the day she arrived. Would you do it again? If you could go back and choose, knowing everything that would happen? Every single day. Isaac brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. I would choose you every single day for the rest of eternity. Good answer. She leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting into the space that had been made for her so many years ago. We did good, did not we? We built something real here. We did. We built a home, a family, a life worth living. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. And we did it because you refused to sit still, because you insisted on being yourself no matter what anyone said. So thank you, Maggie Whitmore. Thank you for keeping my quiet life interesting. Always, she promised, until the very last day. And true to her word, Maggie never stopped moving, never stopped exploring, never stopped filling their lives with energy and love, and the occasional heart attack when she did something particularly daring. Isaac never stopped watching over her, protecting her, loving her with a quiet devotion that needed no words. Together, they lived out their days on the mountain they had made their own, surrounded by the family they had built, the love they had nurtured, and the absolute certainty that they had found in each other everything they had been searching for. The mountain that had once been a refuge became a home. The man who had hidden from the world learned to embrace it again. The woman who had been told she was too much found someone who thought she was exactly right. And together, they proved that sometimes the best love stories are the ones where two people see each other exactly as they are and decide that is precisely who they want to spend forever with. They grew old together on that mountain, their hands always finding each other, their hearts always in sync. And when Isaac finally passed, quiet and peaceful in his sleep at the age of 82, Maggie held his hand and thanked him one last time for seeing her, for loving her, for building a life that had room for all her restless energy and wild spirit. She followed him not long after, unable to imagine a life without him in it, and they were buried side by side on the mountain they had called home, beneath trees they had planted, and sky they had watched together for more than 50 years. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued to tend the mountain, to tell stories about the woman who could not sit still and the mountain man who said that was exactly what he needed. The cabins stood strong through seasons and storms, testament to the foundation Isaac had built and the life Maggie had filled them with. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Arizona mountains in shades of gold and orange, you could almost hear laughter echoing through the trees, the sound of a love story that had transcended time and convention, and everything anyone had said was impossible. Because in the end, that is what love is. Seeing someone exactly as they are, with all their rough edges and wild spirits and restless energy, and saying, yes, that is exactly who I want. Not despite their differences, but because of them. Not to change them, but to celebrate them. not to cage them, but to give them wings. Isaac Whitmore had wanted quiet and solitude when he came to the mountain. What he got was Maggie Duncan, a woman who filled his life with noise and chaos and more love than he had ever imagined possible. She could not sit still, would not conform, refused to be anything other than exactly who she was. And he had looked at all of that and said, "Good, that will keep my quiet life interesting." And it did. For 50 beautiful, chaotic, love-filled years, it absolutely did.